Today we're just going to talk about language in general and maybe a little bit more specifically. We're going to talk about what language is, the word, this word that we talk about. How do we acquire it? How do we attain it? How do we use it? And then what do we think about it? These are some of the things that we want to discuss today. And this will lead us into further discussions about language and what the word is and what it means in our lives. The two key players that we want to use to discuss language today are Saussure and Lacan. These are names you might not be familiar with. Saussure was a linguist, and Lacan was a psychologist or psychoanalyst closely related to Sigmund Freud. Although you might not have heard of him, their ideas kind of go together. If you want to compare them, Freud might have been the wacky one of the two, as you know about his life, although he was brilliant, and Lacan was, more involved with the idea of language and how we acquire it. But first off, language, it's kind of, some people find it easy to write, some people find it hard to write, to speak, to read and understand. Why is this? And it's because language is kind of sticky. It's not something that's just plain, this means this all the time. And we want to understand, how we incorporate language into our lives. First off, we want to really think about and admit that we are creatures of language. When we think about language, first, one thing we want to remember is that we're not just talking about words like English or Spanish. We're talking about anything in what's called the symbolic order. Words are part of that, but a triangle can be language. A symbol that represents something outside of itself would be a language. And when we talk about subject and object in a minute, you'll realize a little bit more what that happens. But we are, we are creatures that are, live within language. And an easy way to really think about this is to think about, where you're at in language. What comes first, thought or language? If you really sit there for a second and think about it. What comes first, thought or language for you? You can think about when you were a child, what came first, thought or language. Think about right now. And you won't be able to think of any thought that doesn't have a word or a symbol, language wrapped around it. If you think of nothing, the word nothing is that symbol or that word. So we really only exist in this idea of language, the word. So, how do we attain it and what is it? Let's define it. First, let's use Saussure. Saussure says that all language is three things. And this is a theory of Saussure's, but it's a theory that we can think about and discuss. You'll see. Let's just go ahead and go through it. All language is, according to Saussure, arbitrary, conventional, and constitutive. What do these terms mean? First off, language is arbitrary because there's no reason in the world why the word dog means dog, why the word book means book. Somebody just arbitrarily pointed at it, as with Adam in the Garden of Eden, or in other ancient texts, somebody arbitrarily walked around naming things. We know this is an old idea because we have ancient texts where this actually happened. People arbitrarily name things. So if there's no reason why one word means one thing and it doesn't mean another, then that's one of the reasons why the language is so sticky. The second thing that Saussure says language is conventional. This means language is conventions, or part of conventions that we have to learn. You're not born knowing the English word dog means a little furry animal running around. You're not born knowing the English word for book means, a book with a cover and pages and information in it. These are things you have to learn. Now, there's arguments on what we're born with predispositions to understand language and things like that, but the fact remains that we're not born knowing language. It's a conventional thing that we do have to learn. So we're arbitrary and conventional. The last thing, according to Saussure, that language is constitutive. This means that language constitutes our reality. It creates who we are. The word creates us. The word on the text, but not just the language in the book, but the world is a text in which we walk through and read every day. So if I look at the world around me and I read it, it helps construct who I am. I look at the past, and I look at the present, and I look at the future, and it helps constructs my identity. Whether you're looking at this text, or the text in the room around you right now, books, shelves, You're in a three-dimensional space. It's constitutive. So all language is arbitrary, conventional, and constitutive. Now, language is all three of these things, but how do we acquire it? How do we get language? How do we understand it and learn this conventional language? Well, this is where Lacan comes into play. Lacan says that we go through 3 stages of acquiring language, or 3 stages of development. And this is where you'll see his relationship to Freud. The first stage that he believes we're in is when we are one with everything. We only exist within a subjective reality, which means when you talk about subject, you're saying I, right? So everything is one. And he relates this to when you're in your mother's womb. You are one with your mother. You don't exist separately from her as of yet, from your perspective. So that's the first stage, this oneness. The second stage, according to Lacan, is called the mirror stage. And this is when you realize your objective reality. It's when you realize what philosophers call the grand dichotomy, the self versus the world, where you are indeed separate from the world around you. Your objective self is separate from your subjective self. And the reason it's called the mirror stage is because you can really experience this when you look in the mirror. Next time you go and you look in a mirror, and this is interesting when you do it, you're always within your subjective reality, from your perspective, everything that you see. So you're always going around, I feel, and when you have a dialogue inside of your head, it's I feel this or I believe this. But when you look in that mirror, you see that object. That's an objective, a linguistic representation of that subject that's within you, a symbol on the wall. And what everyone else sees is that object. And where it really gets kind of confusing is you wonder, and everybody's thought this, does everybody see me the way I see myself? So you have that object which everyone else in the world sees, and then you have that subject, that dichotomy between the two. So we go through that first stage of the oneness, then the separation, the second stage, the mirror stage, where the subjective and objective realities become separate. And then the last stage, according to Lacan, which he believes is the most traumatic, is the acquisition of language. This acquisition of language, we use language to try to get back to that first stage, that oneness stage, where, and according to Lacan, again, this is where he might be connected with Freud, we would say the word mother, but we can never exactly experience mother like we did when we were one with mother. So this word is an attempt to get back to that, but it can't. So, according to Lacan, we use these symbols to represent the real thing. So, one word represents this, represents this, represents this. So, the totality of language represents the totality of nature, and wherein that lies is topic for some of our future discussions. But just to review what we talked about now, we exist within language. We really only exist within language, the word. Language is arbitrary because there's no reason why one word means one thing and it doesn't mean another thing. It's conventional because we have to learn it. And then it's constitutive because it constitutes our reality. We are first one with everything, a subject. Then we are ripped away from that subject by the objective world that uses symbols to, represent that subject and object together, which was the unison that we felt, according to Lacan, when we were one with the mother, or the oneness with God, or the oneness with whatever it is that you're discussing at the time. So, I hope you'll join us for future discussions about language, and when we get into how specific texts such as the Bible, Old Testament, and New Testament, and other texts actually deal with this idea of the Word, because the Word is what we are, and by using it, we can help bring ourselves closer to that oneness with everything. Thank you.